Hello and welcome to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio programme from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Kate Laycock in Bonn. This week on the show, Poland's presidential elections reveal a country on a knife edge.
What the future holds for Poland is even more polarization. So the people who complain about polarization now, wait 5 years, it's going to be great.
After that, a security special featuring reports on the Estonian-led Exercise Hedgehog and the Baltics' bid to head off hybrid Russian warfare.
The combination of attacks on critical infrastructure, on individuals, on commercial property, blowing things up, burning them down, concentrate on the Nordic-Baltic region. This is the hotspot of Europe for so-called hybrid warfare.
Last week's Super Elections Sunday brought continuity to Portugal, with a very big caveat there because the far right made record gains. Relief to Romania, or at least those in Romania who wanted a pro-European liberal rather than a pro-Russian former football hooligan as a president. And to Poland, uncertainty. Centrist Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski may have won the first-round presidential runoffs, but the margin separating him from his opponent, Karol Nawrocki, who is supported by the hard-right Law and Justice Party, is extremely narrow. And if you add Nawrocki's total to the votes achieved by two far-right extremist candidates, Sławomir Mencen and Grzegorz Braun, then the broader right holds over 50% of the vote. How that will play out in practice remains to be seen, but the stakes in Poland's June 1st final round election are of existential consequence. As Michal Gostkiewicz, EU correspondent for DW's Polish department, told me when we spoke shortly after the first round results came in. At stake, he explained, is both the credibility and the viability of Prime Minister Donald Tusk's attempts to bring Poland back in line with Europe and restore the rule of law after 8 years of democratic backsliding under the Law and Justice Party. Here's how Michal saw the first round results.
A lot to unpack here, but first and foremost, I would say that this result is, if not red, then yellow card for Tusk government. They had 1.5 years to introduce the reforms, to fulfill their promises, and the feeling, I'm not saying about concrete results here, I'm only saying about the feeling, the general feeling, because that is, in my opinion, the main reason for people's choices. And the feeling is that the government does not deliver, even among its fans. Whether it happened because the government itself was composed of a very difficult coalition from the center right up to far left, or because conservative president Andrzej Duda did everything to block government's reforms with his vetoes, the typical citizen does not care about it. What he cares about is the result. And from the European perspective, Tusk delivered. He really brought Poland back to European mainstream, and Europe was waiting for him to get Poland back on the European track. The support for the EU in Poland is still record high. Everyone can see what has been built over the last 20 years with EU's money. But on the other hand, there is a big group of the society who is simply not satisfied or does not agree with the values of the EU because they are more conservative, church-oriented, and what the EU presents in the field of values is totally against the values that they consider as the most dearest to them. Also, Trzaskowski's campaign was, let's call it, okay, it was stable. He really did a lot of work. He went all around Poland, to small towns, bigger towns, smaller villages, met with all the necessary people, and still his campaign didn't have highlights, something that everyone would talk about. On the other hand, the Law and Justice that lost power 2 years ago is hungry to get it back. The voters were satisfied with the last 8 years. They want it back. And the candidate, whoever it would be, if they know that this candidate is supported by the leader of the party, by Jarosław Kaczyński, they will simply vote for him, regardless of what he did. The polarization in Poland is so high that both candidates could actually do some terrible things, and their support wouldn't fall below a certain level.
That's so interesting because, and it does sort of provide this context in which the future direction of Poland, because it's no less than that is at stake here, is sort of represented by Donald Tusk and the direction that he sees for the country on the one hand, so pro-European, very much grounded in the rule of law, and then the route that has been pursued for so long by Kaczynski, this figure in the background, the brains, the orchestrator behind the direction that the country took under the Law and Justice Party. But we now have this other figure who I really think we should mention, Sławomir Mencen, so getting around 15%
I would mention two.
Oh, sorry, go on. Add to my list.
I would mention two figures, actually. In the youngest category of voters, both candidates, both Trzaskowski and Nawrocki, their results are simply terrible. They are around 10%. Most of the votes in this younger generation went for Sławomir Mencen, that you mentioned. He's a hardcore right-wing nationalist. But there's another figure to mention. It's Adrian Zandberg, a bright left-wing ideologist. And these two guys captured the attention of the youngest voters. So what the future holds for Poland is even more polarization. So the people who complain about polarization now, wait 5 years, it's going to be crazy.
This is so interesting, and it fits into patterns that we've seen elsewhere in Europe, including Germany, polarization of the youth vote between extreme poles, left and right. So in terms of the EU more widely, what do you think can be learnt from Poland at the moment, perhaps even from mistakes or missed opportunities that Trzaskowski and his campaign might have made in trying to shore up a middle path against this backdrop?
And here the answer is very complicated, because what worked 2 years ago in the parliamentary elections was a wide front. So there was something for everyone. So what worked 2 years ago, why isn't it working right now? First of all, because the government failed to deliver. 2, because of time, and time changes everything. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, it would be really hard in Poland, for example, to find any person who would be against Ukrainians. Now it changed. And basically, I was watching this process, reading comments in social media or looking at what politicians of certain parties would say. The party that immediately started a campaign against Ukrainians, especially based on economic competition, so you have the Polish worker and the Ukrainian worker. Ukrainian worker is cheaper, so it will take your job, right? Or Ukrainian women will take your jobs, you poor Polish women, and they will take your men. The arguments were really crazy. How it worked? After 3 years, a lot of Poles really changed their attitude towards Ukrainians. So at first it was, of course, a manifest of solidarity towards victims of Russian aggression. And we Poles tend to think we know the best in the world how it is to be a victim of Russian aggression. And then as reality kicks in, people get used to things. People get used to war. Yes, they do. Compassion fades away and competition enters. And if someone tried today to campaign on a totally pro-Ukrainian platform, he wouldn't get a lot of votes.
Michal Gostkiewicz of DW's Polish department there. And if you were wondering how Michal spent election night, then I happen to have the inside story.
Yes, I watched Revenge of the Sith, the Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, where everything falls apart. The Galactic Republic turns into the Galactic Empire, and the good people lose. While checking on my phone frantically at the same time the results with my friends.
Was he envisioning Donald Tusk as Princess Leia? The question that I really want to ask, but we'll probably never know the answer to. Meanwhile, in a galaxy not so far away, troops from the US and Europe were taking part in a large-scale international military exercise led by the Estonian Defence Forces. Its name, Exercise Hedgehog, and congratulations to all of our listeners who have recognised that as the answer to last week's quiz question. Our security correspondent, Terry Schultz, was there to see Exercise Hedgehog in operation and to test the readiness of Estonia's spikes.
Some 17,000 soldiers from across NATO are practicing how they'd respond if Russia ever crossed the border into Estonia, sparking the war alarm across the whole alliance. British Lieutenant Colonel Hugh Rakes leads a contingent of UK troops who've answered that hypothetical call in Exercise Hedgehog. He's speaking to us at Estonia's Amari Air Base.
We are integrating into the Estonian National Defence Plan, and we are absolutely working alongside our NATO colleagues to demonstrate what the UK in particular, but also NATO, would do in support of an Article 5 situation. We are rehearsing the defence of NATO, protecting sovereign territory, and for us in particular, we're demonstrating our ability to do that at reach and provide that sort of lethal edge to the land forces here in Estonia.
It's not a far-fetched scenario, explains Peter Kyiv, Director of International Cooperation at Estonia's Defense Ministry. He says once there's a ceasefire in Ukraine, Russia will turn its attention back to its northern borders with NATO. He says it's already upgrading its military capacity there.
This is something that we've been seeing and worrying for a quite long time. It's something that will most likely happen in the coming years. And we also do believe that possibly the next 2, 3, 4 years would be most challenging and critical for the region of this, for the security of this region.
NATO forces are incorporating into their training lessons learned about how Russia is waging war on Ukraine, which is why it's no surprise when our briefings are interrupted. Outside, the soldiers are dealing with a drone attack. The war in Ukraine is very much a drone war. And the West has learned other things, Peter Kyiv says, which makes them train even harder.
We have unfortunately seen from the war in Ukraine how difficult it is actually to reconquer territories that are already lost. It's a practical fact. And we have unfortunately also seen how brutally the Russian Federation behaves itself in the territories that they have occupied in Ukraine.
Just a couple of days earlier, Russia gave NATO a real-life test when it sent a fighter jet as a sign of protest and protection when Estonia sought to detain a Shadow Fleet tanker sailing through Estonian waters with no flag. Video of the incident was released on social media.
This is Estonian warship Papa 6732. Your request will be denied. Follow my instructions. Alter your course to 105 immediately. Over.
Yes.
The ship was escorted out of Estonian waters with no further incident, but the fact that Russia signaled it's watching how these decrepit tankers are handled is considered a political escalation at a minimum. This is just one more example, Estonian Defense Minister Hannu Pevkur told me, of why it's so important his country is now, as he put it, a member of the club, of NATO.
It's still important to understand that one for all for one means that, for instance, Estonia has been in Afghanistan, in Iraq, together with our allies, also together with the United States. We've lost our soldiers there. And many might ask, why did you go to Iraq? Because we were together with our allies. And this is exactly what it's about. We've been able to keep the peace in NATO for 76 years now already. And I hope that we can be able to keep the peace in NATO for the next 76 or 760 years.
Terry Schultz, DW, Tallinn.
And Terry Schultz wasn't the only DW reporter drawn to Estonia this week, as we'll be finding out in just a minute. That's here on Inside Europe with me, Kate Laycock. Long-time Estonia watcher Ben Batka first fell in love with the country for its peaceful, prosperous, tech-savvy small country vibe. Now, as Estonia finds itself at the forefront of Europe's bid to fend off suspected and anticipated Russian hybrid attacks, Ben was drawn back again. His particular area of interest this time? Hybrid warfare, shadow fleets, and the protection of critical deep-sea infrastructure.
A small, black and unmanned boat equipped with cameras and sensors is following an unflagged oil tanker through Estonia's exclusive economic zone. Direction: St. Petersburg. The oil tanker drops an anchor. Alerted by the unmanned vessel, the Estonian Coast Guard and Navy rush to the scene. They storm the tanker. Catastrophe averted. The sole remaining power cable between NATO countries Estonia and Finland is safe from anchor damage. This scenario hasn't actually happened yet. Albeit hypothetical, this is exactly the kind of action that Estonia is foreseeing as it ratchets up its surveillance and deterrence capabilities to protect its critical seabed infrastructure from sabotage carried out by the so-called shadow fleet.
Unmanned surfer vessels, you can escort all the hostile or suspicious boats or these big cargo ships. And when your adversary knows that you are constantly monitored, there is a little bit smaller chance that they do actually something.
That's Janus Tamm, CEO of DevSec Intel, an Estonian company recently tapped by the Ministry of Defense to protect pipelines and cables. The numerous electricity, gas, telecommunications and other interconnections that crisscross the Baltic Sea are critical to the functioning of the Baltic coastal states. Estonia's Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna says attacking underwater infrastructure is just one part of suspected Russian hybrid warfare.
Infrastructure, of course, we need to protect them. It's existential for us, about the gas, about the energy. Estlink 2, the connection between Estonia and Finland about energy, was cut already. If we would list everything hybrid, what has happened within the last 3 years in Europe, our region, we could have been in shock and asked Article 5. This is what Russia is doing, testing us and boiling our societies as a frog.
Article 5 provides that if a NATO ally is the victim of an armed attack, the other members of the alliance will come to its defense. The stakes, in other words, are global.
Finnish authorities are investigating whether a ship which left a Russian port may have damaged a power cable connecting Finland and Estonia.
Last December, the Eagle S tanker sailing under a Cook Islands flag is believed to have dragged its anchor, damaging powerline Estlink 2 in the process. 10 other interconnections, ranging from gas pipelines to data and communication cables, have been damaged between October 2023 and January of this year. So far, none of the investigations into any of these incidents have provided conclusive proof of intentionality, and civilian disruption has been minimal. However, Mina Orlander, a prominent Baltics expert with Chatham House, warns against assuming that this means that the sabotage, if that's what it was, has been unsuccessful.
If we assume that Russia is behind this, they know that, okay, so far these efforts have not been enough if they want to actually knock out some critical functions. So this is actually also very valuable information, so they know how they would have to scale this kind of an attack against critical infrastructure in these countries in a conflict.
At last weekend's annual Lennart Meri conference in Tallinn, hosted by Estonia's International Center for Defense and Security, much of the talk focused on Baltic Sentry, a NATO mission launched in January with the aim of protecting critical infrastructure in the wake of the Eagle S incident. The Estonian-led military exercise Hedgehog, ongoing at the time of the conference, added to the sense of the Baltic countries being at the front lines of a new hybrid war front. However, the British security expert Edward Lucas told me that, in his opinion, the response is still not enough. He believes that the Nordic-Baltic 8, that's the name given to the regional cooperation between the smaller Baltic countries, their larger Scandinavian counterparts and Iceland, still need to significantly up their defense game, both on the high seas and in the infosphere.
The combination of attacks on critical infrastructure, on individuals, on commercial property, blowing things up, burning them down, concentrate on the Nordic-Baltic region. This is the hotspot of Europe for so-called hybrid warfare. The shadow fleet, in particular, sailing without flags, without insurance, in unseaworthy vessels, posing a serious threat to the environment and also carrying cargoes that are fueling Russia's war machine. We're already trying to defend our critical subsea infrastructure, and we have Baltic Sentry and other operations to try and observe what Russia's doing and, in theory, to stop them. But it's not working because these attacks are continuing.
According to Mina Orlander, Russia's hybrid warfare includes airspace violations, paramilitary activities, using the Orthodox Church for espionage, Russian nationals buying properties near strategic locations, vandalism and acts of sabotage like last year's fire at a shopping mall in Warsaw or smuggling explosives on cargo planes, as well as cyber attacks.
This has been ongoing for much longer than the war in Ukraine, for like decades in the Nordic Baltic region. At the same time, since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the intensity has increased significantly. So you can literally talk about warfare. The whole point is to stay below a declaration of war. And there's also catch-22 in the sense that when you have a high level of resilience, it doesn't cause such damage that it would warrant a stronger reaction either. So that makes it so hard to respond in terms of also rule of law, because we don't want to undermine the basis of our societies and our system while we are responding to this. In fact, it's not possible to always be prepared for every imaginable attack, because our open democratic societies are just by design vulnerable in some ways.
Estonian Foreign Minister Tsahkna admits that this is indeed a hard balance to strike, and that trying to follow and change laws, rules and procedures can be a very long and delicate process.
It's not about law only, but also about capabilities and political willingness. In the western part of the world, we are following the rule of law, and it's the right thing to do. But actually, we sometimes forget the main principle based on international law is that we need to protect our people, and this is giving the right to use the force. Now the question is, we need to have a common political will. We cannot let Estonia or Finland or Denmark, whoever, alone. And this is a process.
So
and
you're
this
saying
is a
that
big
whatever
change.
next step you take, you have to do collectively. You can't just escalate
We
alone.
need to do it collectively. Council of the Baltic Sea region is really the place we do the real stuff.
And can you comment on the real stuff?
You'll see next time.
The next incident, you mean?
Yeah.
Tsahkna's remarks echo the two calls for actions that were perhaps heard the loudest at Lennart Meri conference. We shall go forward together, the conference theme inspired by Winston Churchill, and pursuing a escalate to de-escalate strategy vis-à-vis Russia, as one speaker put it. Ben Batke, DW in Tallinn, Estonia.
Our Spotify quiz question this week comes to us courtesy of a listener tip-off from Iceland. Pál Ólafsson wrote to us to tell us about a story making headlines in the Icelandic media at the moment. It all revolves around allegations that Iceland's richest man hired police officers to carry out surveillance operations on a group of civilians involved in a shareholders' class action lawsuit against him. Now, what we want to know is, what is the name of Iceland's richest man? And here we've asked Pál for some help. Is it A,
Björgólfur Thor Björgólfsson,
B,
Thor Björgólfur Thorsson,
or C,
Ólafur Thor Ólafsson?
Thanks for that, Pál. Our security special continues after the break. That's here on Inside Europe with me, Kate Laycock, in Germany.
I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're with The World, Public Radio's leading global news program.
We cover the biggest news events developing every day and give you the context you need to make sense of them.
And Carolyn, I also like our smaller stories, tales of discovery and human kindness, things that make us laugh.
Stories that kind of shrink our world and make us feel more connected.
Subscribe and listen every weekday to The World.
Welcome to Those Who Can't Teach Anymore, a narrative podcast series that explores why teachers are leaving education and what can be done to stop the exodus. This season, we're getting a look at the year and the life of teachers from across the country through their audio journals.
I am Darcy Ostermiller.
This is Megan Overgott.
This is Sophie V.
This is Charlie Blackwood.
This is Taylor Barris.
This is Iva Moss-Redman.
This is David Whisker.
This is Dan Morris.
This is Amanda Smith.
Look for Those Who Can't Teach Anymore, Season 2, a different kind of the same thing.
Welcome back to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio programme from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. Our security special continues now as we delve into the murky worlds of Hungarian spy rings, Icelandic private espionage, and Swiss bunkers. The backdrop to all these stories is, of course, Russia's war in and its suspected hybrid operations outside of Ukraine. If you're just joining us now via one of our international partner stations, you'll find a whole load of extra context in the podcast version of this show. Basically, though, Cold War-style espionage is back, but with a 21st century twist. We've already reported on a Bulgarian spy ring. This week, the trial of 3 men accused of an alleged Russian sabotage plot got underway in Germany. On Wednesday, 11 Western countries accused a notorious Russian hacking group of targeting defence, transport and tech firms involved in helping Ukraine, and the list goes on. Of all the spy stories circulating in the European security soup, however, perhaps the most shocking is that of an alleged Hungarian spy ring that the Ukrainian authorities recently announced that they had busted. And here is where things start to get really crazy. I'm going to hand over to our Budapest correspondent Stefan Boss for the summary.
The Security Service of Ukraine, or SBU, said it detained 2 Ukrainian military veterans as part of its crackdown on a Hungarian spy ring, and that was operating in the area, also known as Sarkapatia, in Ukraine. It's in the western part of that nation, and the SBU officials claim that the spy work collected information on military defenses in that area and also sentiment among the local population. And it published a video interrogation of one of the detainees in handcuffs with his face blurred, so it really looked quite serious. Now, what we do know is that one of the detainees, described as a 40-year-old veteran from the western Ukrainian town of Berehove, which has, by the way, a majority ethnic Hungarian population, he had been recruited in 2021 as a sleeper agent. Now, and it is also claimed that he was activated by a handler from Hungary in 2024 and asked to collect information. Now, it is alleged that at a meeting in Hungary, the man received a cash payment for providing information, as well as to help recruit more people to the network of informants. Now, and there is also a second suspect. That is a woman with a past in the security services, apparently. She was allegedly involved in collecting military information. And the SBU stressed it was all part of obtaining data, possible even for a Hungarian invasion in the future in that part of Ukraine. So the suspects now face charges of high treason, which could result in life imprisonment. So it's really a very serious situation.
Okay, so we've got Ukraine saying we have found a Hungarian spy ring, preparing the ground for a possible future Hungarian invasion of Ukraine. I mean, the allegations, they don't get much more serious than that, really, do they, on a geopolitical level? This is really serious, high-level stuff.
Well, Hungary's foreign minister, Péter Szijjártó, is furious. He dismissed the accusations as propaganda and announced the expulsion of 2 Ukrainian spies working under diplomatic cover at the Ukrainian embassy in Budapest. In response, this is what he said about that.
Mi nem tűrjük, hogy Ukrajnában ilyen lejárató akciókat indítsanak folyamatosan.
Now, the minister says we will not tolerate the continual launching of such smear campaigns against Hungary and the Hungarian people in Ukraine. That is why today we expelled 2 spies working under diplomatic cover at the Ukrainian embassy in Budapest from Hungary. So you can really see that there is a lot of anger among the people of the government of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. Of course, now what is also happening now is that opposition figures have accused the government of Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who is obviously viewed here as a close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin, of driving Hungary into a war with Ukraine. And they also have leaked a recording of an explosive audio recording, I have to say, that already has caused political upheaval here in Hungary, which is, by the way, also a NATO military alliance member state. And in that recording, the defense minister, Krzysztof Salai-Probroniski, can be heard discussing sweeping military reforms. And he also suggests even displacing the current officers which were trained by NATO for individuals more aligned with the ruling Fidesz party. So if true and if authentic, then this will take on a new significance. And it also comes, of course, ahead of the elections next year. And there is a feeling among the opposition that Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who is currently lacking in the polls, that he's trying everything he can to remain in power, including even having an anti-European Union campaign with all kinds of posters I can see, for instance, near my home at the moment.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about these posters, Stefan. What are you seeing?
Well, I think it's fair to say that Orban is desperately trying to ensure that his more conservative and nationalist voters remain supportive of him. I've seen large posters here in the streets of Budapest featuring the president of the EU's Executive Commission, along with the Ukrainian leader and the president of the European People's Party, saying, "Don't let them decide." And there are also television and social media campaigns confronting citizens with a government-sponsored pro-Russia message, basically saying evil Brussels drives the war and undermines peaceful Hungary.
So an incredibly tense international and domestic situation, and Prime Minister Viktor Orban's position in Hungary, which has seemed unassailable for so long, now really starting to wobble, and his reaction being something that is a cause of concern, not just within Hungary, but also with its neighbours.
Absolutely, and the opposition and also the neighbours see this also this spy situation as part of a broader campaign by Orban to remain in power and even, if necessary, ask his friend Vladimir Putin to support him in this. That's at least how they would view it. And they are extremely concerned about this situation. They fear a Russia-style crackdown, and they say this is all part of a broader agenda for Prime Minister Viktor Orban ahead of the elections in 2026.
Our Budapest correspondent Stefan Boss there. We will, of course, be hearing more from Stefan as the countdown to next year's crucial elections in Hungary draws closer. Now, how are you feeling? After all these anxiety-inducing spy stories, are you in need of a safe space? If so, never fear. I know a place with 370,000 of them. That's the number of bunkers in the small, peaceful and mountainous country of Switzerland. And it's enough to shelter all 9 million residents for up to 2 weeks during a national emergency. How do I know this? Well, it's because I read a fascinating piece in the online magazine The Dial. Its title was Safe Space, and its author, a Swiss-based US-American journalist called Jessie Jezewska-Stevens. The good people at The Dial gave me her number, and I caught up with her just as Jessie was about to descend the elevator to go down to her apartment block's very own bunker.
So we are in the elevator, and this is the basement of the building. It's kind of a 1970s style building. There's probably about 100 families altogether, and I am now in the basement and in the hallway. There's lots of exposed pipes. All the doors are a cheerful bright green, and I am walking towards our bunker, which has a reinforced concrete door to regulation standards of about just under a foot. In this bunker, as is very typical in Switzerland, it is currently divided into caves, which is what here in the Francophone part of Switzerland we call our storage spaces. And I have just reached ours, where since my husband and I moved here from America, we've stored mostly American electronics that are not compatible with European voltage.
One man's bunker is another man's cellar, basically.
Exactly. Perhaps in the future, we will put our bunker to even better use. Better uses include having a wine cellar or a sauna. A historian I spoke with at the University of Bern had mentioned right after the Cold War, when there was this sort of huge wave of relief, bunkers were recreation centers or used for choral practice and all kinds of things.
Amazing. Those are amazing sort of peacetime uses, but the vibe at the moment is rather different, isn't it?
It is. I think that especially since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, tensions have remained quite high, anxiety is high, and I think it was a pretty palpable switch here in Switzerland, even just before the parliament had discussed actually retracting some of the long-standing regulations, national regulations that have been in place since the Second World War, basically, to build bunkers in all new buildings in order to make sure there is always a stock of air raid shelters and nuclear bunkers to protect the population. And I think before 2022, just before, the mood was, maybe this isn't so necessary anymore. I think that mood has certainly changed.
Have you, Jessie, noticed your own kind of attitude to your bunker in your apartment block changing?
I mean, I hadn't ever thought about it before in the US. So the idea that here, in fact, in addition to universal childcare or universal healthcare, there would also be a universal bunker policy was really a surprise and even an object of fascination. I think compared to other European countries as well, the idea of there being kind of universal coverage in a nuclear grade bunker is also unusual and also kind of an object of fascination and kind of a gold standard.
I have to admit, I hadn't thought of that framing either, because I'd been thinking of it as an interesting and very sort of, perhaps typically Swiss sort of cautious security measure. But the idea that actually, of course, this is an extension of an idea of universal coverage, so universal access to something that is deemed necessary for all citizens, that really does feel quite radical.
Yeah. Switzerland is a small country, and they also quite famously have this unique system of government. There is an expectation and a kind of attachment to direct participation in your democracy. And I think that allows Switzerland to offer a lot of these public services and, on a small scale, do experiments about, how do people want to spend tax dollars. And I think at its best, it can be a kind of experiment or sort of training grounds for the kinds of policies that we might want to adopt in other liberal democracies with a social state, but where it's maybe harder, I think, to come up with a consensus that you're able to produce in a smaller country with, only 8 million people.
Jessie, maybe you could just humour me for a minute. Just take a couple of deep breaths and just look around and get in touch with your bunker for me.
Yes. Communing with the bunker.
Do you feel safe? Do you feel safe in your bunker?
This is the longest I have ever spent in my bunker. I do feel safe at the moment. My main concern would be locking myself in here because the reinforced concrete door, locks automatically. I'm trying to imagine how there are no windows. It's a white room with these storage containers and these wooden barriers. I'm trying to imagine how I would feel being down here with other residents. Let's see, with some 1, 2, 3, there are 8 calves down here. So yeah, I'm wondering how I would feel with 20 to 30 other people in here as well.
Probably doesn't bear too much thinking about. Do you want to open the door and get some light? Whilst Jessie Jasewska-Stevens reascends towards the light there, I'm going to cut in to tell you that we will be linking to her piece in the Dial, Safe Spaces, in our show notes. Before we end this security special, however, I just wanted to share with you a piece which I first heard on GBH and PRX's The World programme. It's about Ukrainian girl and boy scouting, which is experiencing a surge in popularity. But at the same time, the war has created a shortage of scouting counsellors, as many are serving on the front lines. Emily Johnson reports.
A group of girls are gathered in a basement meeting space in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv. It's a weeknight, and they're singing along as their counselor, Olvia Kondratuk, strums on a guitar. Each wears a uniform, a beige shirt with merit badges sewn on, and a brown skirt, along with a red scouting neckerchief. They're members of the Ukrainian scouting program known as Plast. This is the group for girls 10 to 12 years old. They're given a challenge: who can build the tallest tower out of paper? It's meant to teach them how to work together. Since the full-scale invasion in 2022, demand to enroll in Plast is at an all-time high, but there simply aren't enough adult volunteers available to lead all the groups. Not when so many Ukrainians who grew up in Plast are currently serving in the armed forces. Many Plast members who join the military find that the skills they learned as scouts come in handy when fighting a war. Skills like navigation and tying knots.
I usually say, when people ask, what was war for you? I usually answer it was a big scouting camp, but Russians were just trying to kill us.
Andrei Zolab served as a commander of a medical unit in an air assault brigade for 2 years. He's been heading the Veterans Office here in Lviv. His military patches are framed on the wall, including one that marks him as a member of Plast.
It was on my bulletproof vest during all the war.
He says he did his best to share the knowledge he gained from Plast with his fellow soldiers.
I was explaining to farmers from villages how to camp, how to start a fire. It was against something about Plast.
A major part of Plast's mission has been to preserve and instill Ukrainian identity in children in the face of the Soviets' repeated attempts to stamp it out. Zolab's wife and older daughter are also scouts.
Part of great work of Plast is growing that understanding in young kids. To be proud you are Ukrainian means to go to defend Ukraine if needed, to be happy with Ukraine, to be sad with Ukraine, to struggle with Ukraine, and so on and so on.
Ksania Boluk is a Plast volunteer who works with teenage scouts in Lviv. She says the war has created more programming challenges, like finding wilderness areas for summer camps that aren't mined or otherwise too dangerous.
First of all, it's a challenge of camping at all. And without camping, scouting is not scouting, actually. But we have a lot of challenges, like so kids were safe. We can camping only in few regions in Ukraine.
But she says it's worth it to see the kids' faces when they find themselves out in nature.
Even in the time of full-scale invasion, we need to do camps, we need to have scouting, we need to have Plast, because they have something else in their lives and something good in their lives.
After a jam-packed hour of activities, Olvia and another scout call their meeting to a close. The girls line up in a straight row. Before they head home, they sing a Plast anthem about the forests calling them and about happiness, glory, and freedom.
The world's Emily Johnson there. You're listening to Inside Europe. I'm Kate Laycock. We've spent the programme looking at war, but I want to end with peace, or at least with what happens when war ends. Of the estimated 5 million Syrians who fled their country over the course of its bloody civil war, over 3 million ended up in neighbouring Turkey. Now, with Syria's dictator Bashar al-Assad overthrown and a new regime in place, some Syrians in Turkey are making the journey back, driven by hope and the belief that life in Syria could offer more than the uncertain future that they've faced in exile. Yelenia Gostkiewicz sent us this report from Gaziantep, near the Turkish-Syrian border.
For over a decade in Turkey, Mohammed Al-Jbein has tried it all, printing a Syrian magazine before it shut down, running a coffee shop, starting a coffee factory, and even opening a local supermarket. But no matter what he does, he says the rising cost of living, high taxes, and daily discrimination make life in Turkey increasingly difficult. Soon he will be one of thousands making the journey back to Syria. For Mohammed, the decision is final. At the beginning of the year, he shut down his supermarket and signed a voluntary return form. With that, he'll be able to cross the border into Idlib, the city in northwest Syria where he's chosen to rebuild his life.
I went to Syria, to Idlib. The situation is good there. There's water, there is electricity. It is safe to the extent that the shops are not closed. I went at the beginning of last month. Now I signed the papers, and I will go back there.
On December 8, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, an armed group once linked with al-Qaeda and already in control of Idlib, launched a lightning operation, seizing Damascus and toppling longtime dictator Bashar al-Assad. Since then, the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, estimates that more than 290,000 Syrian refugees have returned from neighboring countries, although the number includes those in transit from beyond the region. Another 800,000 internally displaced people have also gone back to their homes, bringing the total number of returnees to over 1 million, according to the UN. Overall, the war displaced around 13 million people. Turkey's interior minister says that since December 9, more than 80,000 Syrians have returned from Turkey alone. At its peak, Turkey hosted up to 4 million Syrian refugees, more than any other country. In recent years, the presence of Syrians in Turkey has become a heated political issue. Blamed for soaring inflation, high unemployment, and the rising cost of living, they've often been used as scapegoats in the country's economic struggles. To encourage voluntary returns, Turkey is allowing one member of each Syrian family to go home temporarily, with the option to re-enter Turkey up to 3 times. The idea is to give refugees a chance to assess conditions back home, and ultimately to encourage more to return.
I rented a shop the last time I went, and I'm going to put all my belongings there while I look for an apartment. I will look to start some projects, maybe a cafe, maybe a hotel. At the border, the Syrian officers told our group, "Forgive us for keeping you in exile for so long."
Mohammed is not alone. At the Civelgozu border crossing in southern Turkey, on an ordinary day in February, around 100 people wait for their turn to cross. Some drag heavy suitcases, others stand behind pickup trucks piled high with furniture. Many are unsure about the procedures, while some have made sudden, life-changing decisions, like this young woman crossing with her father and sister.
I applied 3 years ago, and I was going, this is my 2nd year, and I had to drop it now. Living here in Turkey is actually very difficult now. When we first came, it was actually very good, but with the time and stuff, it became very difficult for us to live here and to find jobs and stuff, so we had to come back. Actually, we packed everything in 4 days. 4 days we made the decision and packed everything and came. I'm still surprised that I'm here.
Under a large white tent, women and children huddle together, seeking shelter from the cold. Their future is uncertain. They're heading to a country where, according to a recent UNDP report, 1 in 4 people are jobless, 3 out of 4 rely on humanitarian aid, and 90% live in poverty. And yet, for some, the prospect of returning still feels like a better option. 25-year-old Abdul Ali is crossing the border with his brother and parents.
Now I want to go back to Idlib because my home is there, in Idlib, and I don't want to go back to Turkey at all. Because we're very tired of life in Turkey and the cruelty of Turkey. Whether the economy was good or not, you worked without any rights, without any social security.
In Gaziantep, a city of 2 million near the Syrian border, where Syrians make up roughly a quarter of the population, there's a street in the central market lined with businesses that, despite their Turkish names, are mostly run by Syrians. Last summer, tensions in the city reached a boiling point. Riots erupted in several areas, fueled by anti-Syrian sentiment, after an alleged sexual abuse incident in the central Anatolian city of Kayseri. No one expects an immediate mass return to Syria, but some are starting to consider it. In a textile shop on Sejan Street, 19-year-old Kuzay El-Halaf, who left primary school due to the racism he experienced, now runs the family business while his father travels to their hometown of Aleppo to check on their home and determine if returning is an option.
I'm thinking about returning to Syria permanently. It is not easy to get a job at the moment because the country is in a state of war. Our home is destroyed, but we will rebuild it. Recently, we have been exposed to more racism. We want to return to our homeland, no matter the circumstances.
A report in 2022 estimated that Syrians invested about $500 million in businesses they established in Turkey, significantly contributing to the economy. But last summer, a group of trade unions signed a petition in which they accused Syrians of undercutting Turkish businesses and taking jobs from locals. Then there are those, the vast majority, who have been employed in the informal economy, in backbreaking jobs in textile and other factories. If they leave, economists believe the effect would be destabilizing. Just down the road on Sejan Street, shop owner Murat Ourzal values employees like 32-year-old Mune for her ability to speak both Arabic and Turkish. Mune, who recently had a baby, is allowed to bring her newborn to work. His crib tucked beside a row of abayas.
It affected our business life positively. There was no problem. On the contrary, they came here. I mean, honest people worked, settled down. Of course, we don't want to send away people we love. It would be a loss for us, right?
Mohammed Aljbin is enjoying one of his final evenings with his extended family, watching a concert in a hall in Gaziantep. He knows that once he crosses the border, there's no turning back, unless he risks returning illegally.
Going back to Syria is better than staying here. I'm a foreigner here. Turkey is not my country. I don't want to be a refugee.
Ilenia Gostoli, DW, Gaziantep.
And with that, we reach the end of the show. Inside Europe was produced by Sam Baker and me, Kate Laycock. Our sound engineer was Michal Springer. If you would like to get in touch with feedback or ideas for the show, then the address is insideeurope@dw.com. Inside Europe comes to you from DW in Bonn, Germany.